2001. So ironically, I bought an info product off of TV commercials called No Down Payment with Carlton Sheets. So for those that are a little bit older may know Carlton Sheets. I think he stopped educating, sometime in the 2000s. He passed away a few years ago, but he was really big in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, just promoting how you could buy properties with no money down. And so pulled out my credit card and bought the $200 course and just started buying properties. And, at the time I was waiting tables. I was in school actually, and I ended up dropping out of school with 9 hours left to graduate to not start the business, but to spend more time in the business. And I thought to myself, I'll go back. I'll go back and finish my degree. And here we are 23 years later with no degree, a few hours left still. These days, I don't know that you really need a college degree. And, we won't go down that rabbit hole too much. But, real estate has been great. I bought over 1,000 properties using none of my own money. Some of them I used my own money, but most of them I used other people's money. Still do that till today. A lot has happened in 23 years. First 10 years of my business. On paper, everything looked pretty good, but really I was working just way too many hours, 60 to 80 hour weeks. Didn't have much of a life. Grind again, 60 to 80 hours a week, weekends, didn't socialize too much, and just made a lot of wrong mistakes. I think a lot of us have been there where we get into something, we get into it for money and we get into it for time, and what happens? We have no time and we have no money, right? And so I made a big shift back in 2010, 2011, and I said, you know what? I'd fired my staff a couple times, and I said, I just have to do things smarter, right? So I went to my sister and I said, I'm just sick of dealing with the wrong people. And a lot of it was my fault looking back. I tried to pay too cheap of a price. I didn't train him very well. I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't do right, but things happen for reasons. So I hit my sister up and she basically ran the company she was working for. And I said, hey, if I bring you on, do you think you can take me where I want to go? And I set out my goals. I was like, here's what I want to do. And she looked me in the eye and she said, there's no doubt in my mind I can do that. That was, again, 2010, 14 years ago. And that's when things turned around. I was able to, within about 3 to 4 years, actually step out of my business, move to San Diego, where I currently live, and my operation is in Wichita, Kansas. Things just started lining up after that. After you start surrounding yourself with good people, you start making, higher quality, high level decisions, things just kind of start falling into place. So in 2012 is when I discovered TV commercials. I actually went to it's kind of a long story that I'll try and keep short. I went to a networking event. I met a guy named Brian. Brian ended up kind of really following up with me a lot. He was a young kid. He was driven. He was wanting kind of mentoring. So I ended up mentoring him, ended up becoming good friends with him. So about 6 months after I met him, he's like, hey, I met this guy named Cody. Let's go. He's actually having a poker game. Would you like to come? Because he knew I liked to play poker. We go into the basement of Cody's house, and I see these two guys across the way, and I'm like, I recognize those guys. Wait a second. I recognize those guys from TV commercials, right? So they each had their own TV commercial. So at that point, I'm celebrity struck, whatever you want to call it, because these guys are on TV. I'm thinking, man, I'm hanging out with these guys playing poker or whatever. So I ended up sitting next to one of them kind of on purpose. His name was Chad. And I was like, Chad, man, what do you tell me about TV? And I expected him to say what most people think. Most people, when they think about TV, they think it's for big brands, it's way too expensive, and it's just for branding. And I expected him to say, man, it's just really expensive. We do okay with it. We brand our business. But when I started asking him about it, his eyes lit up and he's like, dude, we do millions and millions of dollars a year from TV. And he's like, that is the only marketing channel we have to do. And he just started explaining all the benefits of TV, about how credibility standpoint, about how other people see it. And then they tell their friends if they're looking, because he had a construction business. So people were like, hey, I'm looking to remodel my house. Or like, oh, go to Southwest Remodeling and check them out. I see them on TV. And so, I started asking him a lot of questions. And he goes, hey, why don't you call my media guy, Drew? And Drew can, tell you kind of what he did for me and, tell you about the TV space. So Monday morning, I called Drew. I said, Drew, heard you're the TV guy. Tell me all about this thing. So he's like, I'll tell you what. He's like, I think I know what your demographic is. I'm going to go to the stations. I'm going to negotiate some rates for you. I'll bring it back to you if you like it. Let's go. It was about a week later, calls me up. He's like, hey, man, got some good news. I got some really good rates. He's like, for $3,000, I can get you, I think it was over 300 commercials a month. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's insane. Like, I thought he would come back with like, $10,000. You get like 100 commercials, because I'd heard that it was really expensive. So anyway, so I wrote the scripts. We kind of worked on it together, produced the commercial, up and running in 30 days. And my first month, I made $35,000 from the $3,000 ad spend, and totally just off and running from there. So 12 years later, it's still my number one lead source. We get tons of credibility and exposure from TV. We have a ton of other marketing channels. It helps every single marketing channel that we do. And it's just been a game changer. And it was kind of at that time, again, I felt like I needed to start making better and smarter decisions. Started with hiring, then it started with other decisions that I made with working less and automating things and creating better systems. And then led into, how do I market smarter, right? How do I get people calling me instead of me having to reach out to them? So that's kind of how the TV thing started, and here's where we are today. And I just love talking about TV because I feel like it's one of those things where people still think it's a branding play. People think their business isn't big enough for it. They think it's way too expensive. And also the big misnomer that people think is that everything's gone to streaming. But if you look at the data for our demographic, which is older people with houses that are less expensive, they're still watching 2.5 hours of TV every single day. 2.5 hours of TV, right? And that's probably on the low end. I bet it's even higher than that. Because when I used to go into houses, gosh, it's been almost 10 years since I went into a house with a seller. Guess what? Their TV was on. They're just watching TV during the day, hanging out. That's just how they grew up. That was, back in the day, that was a privilege, right? Back in can't remember the exact years that TV got really popular. Was it 50s or something, 50s, 60s? That was a huge privilege. And so even to this day, older people, our demographic, are watching TV and they haven't quite gone to streaming yet. So big proponent of TV, and I just think it helps everything that you do in your business.